Hi everybody, welcome, good morning or good afternoon or good evening if you're watching this as a recording later. My name's Abby Steele, and in this session today we're going to think about reading fluency. So bear with me as I share my slides. Hope you're all well, by the way. Not to share window, maybe share this window, share this window. There we go. Hopefully you can all see the slides, and then let me just get my chat up on the screen so that you can talk to me during if you would like to. There we go. So you should see a chat box. Good morning, Sarah. I did wonder if that was you. I had a little look down. It was really comforting to see some friendly names, people that I know. So yeah, please do use the chat throughout to chat to me, interact, ask questions, etc. So I wanted to get together today to talk about reading fluency. It's something that I keep hearing over and over again. Fluency, 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 fluency. And I've always felt very comfortable with what reading fluency means to me. But then the more I've heard it, the more I've questioned myself and thought, am I missing something? Is there more to this? Some things I'm seeing I agree with, some things I'm seeing I don't quite agree with. So I just wanted to have a little explore of that and take you along for the ride, because if I'm thinking these things, then other people must be thinking these things as well. So here are some of my concerns, the things that are playing on my mind around fluency. And yes, I could be being dramatic. And I'm hoping, one of the things I hope to achieve is that we come back to a simplicity of what fluency means and a simplicity of how we can improve children's fluency. So do we have a shared industry understanding of what reading fluency is? I feel as if at the moment in different documents that I'm reading, people are meaning different things by fluency. The same as when people talk about reading, the word, reading, children reading, that has many different meanings actually. And so I think the same is happening. But then does it matter? Does it matter so long as we are loosely talking about the same thing? This is a big concern of mine. Rereading the same text multiple times is not decoding to a point of automaticity. Rereading multiple times the same text is taking us back to whole word and whole sentence and whole book rote learning. And I speak from first-hand experience of one of my children, but I see it in schools as well, that and don't misinterpret me, rereading is beneficial. There are many benefits to rereading a text, of course there are, and it can help on a surface level with being a bit more fluent. But if you continually reread that text, my son and a lot of other children I see become very bored with it, and actually they just memorize the text, they memorize the sentence. And so then really, are we helping their reading skills there? Possibly not. So I have concerns over the amount of rereading being promoted at the detriment of rereading at the same level or reading multiple texts with similar words in, for example. And then my other concern is, are teachers seriously using a timer to measure reading speeds and therefore fluency? We all moan on the one hand that we have a lack of time. We don't have enough time to listen to readers one-to-one or in small groups as much as we'd like to. And yet we're prepared to sit with these children with a timer and count the number of words and measure it in that way. And yes, you could argue, well, you only do it for a minute. It's really quite quick. But I just feel as if, really, is that really necessary? Maybe for some children, if we have concerns, maybe if we're a very new teacher or we're not confident in our skills, but I just worry about seeing this rolled out in a bigger way. So my aims, the reason I'm really pleased that you're giving your time to listen to me talk, is I want to get you thinking. I like in the way that I talk, the way that I train, to make you think. You might agree with things I say, you might not agree with things I say, and that is absolutely fine. I'm not here to kind of preach to you. I'm here to literally get those, brain cells working and get you reflecting on your opinions. I hope to keep you on the straight and sensible path. I don't like it when things become overcomplicated. And sometimes in education, we do that. We focus on an area and we all get very technical about it. And whilst that's great to think more deeply, we can overcomplicate things. It doesn't need to be like that. And to remind you to work smarter and not harder. Always as a teacher, we have to think about, how can I work smarter with this and not harder? What happened to the skill of the teacher to judge fluency? Yes, they're reading fluency. No, they're not reading fluently. What can I do about it? You know, it's a skill that we have as teachers. And I think sometimes we lose that, or we lose our confidence. So when you go online, particularly Facebook groups, Facebook pages, it's really scary, actually, the amount of people that are flapping over, panicking over, overthinking, overcomplicating this idea of fluency. Excuse me. And just a recent example I came across, a teacher was asking, I think it was, they were asking about whether to move a child up a book level. And somebody had responded very authoritatively with, children should be 90% fluent by the time they've had a book for a week and read it at least 3 times, reading 9 out of 10 words fluently. And whilst I get that some people like to have a guide and a steer, my goodness, I could do hours on just this one comment of us really unpicking where this message incorrectly came from, and that no, it wasn't really based on research or evidence. It's been misunderstood and miscommunicated over a large passage of time when things have moved on in the way that we teach reading. And so take it with a pinch of salt as a light guide by all means, but actually please don't get hung up on statements like this. It makes me really sad that some of us feel like we have to seek out a formula to validate our judgments. We're not confident to just say, I'm happy with how they're reading very fluently, you know, they're reading well at that level, we can move them up a level, those types of things. So our plan for the session is going to be a romp through. I'm going to try and pack it all into the hour. I know everybody's time is very precious, so I do speak fast. I apologise. If you have any access issues, if English is not your first language, or if you have any hearing difficulties and you need me to slow down, please say something, or please reach out to me afterwards if you want any clarification. So the plan, these are the things that were on my mind. It was a brain dump. What do I want to think about a bit more about fluency? What is it? How much does it matter? What does the research say, particularly, and also what are people saying more recently? So we can go back in time, but what are they saying more recently? Because often we can get a lot of clues about that. For example, if the DFE and Ofsted are repeatedly saying things, you can bet your bottom dollar they're going to start looking for things. And I already saw, and there was so much when I started researching this, that I didn't pick out all of the exact quotes, but I did see in the new Ofsted English review report they've done, they're going to review, I'm pretty sure, don't quote me, 99.9% sure, they're going to actually review their, when they go into schools and look at what you're doing, not investigation, the visits, they're going to review the visits and they're going to impact some of this onto that. So you know that that's going to happen. So we need to be ahead of the game and be thinking about it. So what are people saying? How can we teach reading fluency well? And should we be measuring, and how should we be measuring and assessing fluency? Especially in light of me saying, oh, don't be worrying about 90%, this, that, and the other, 9 out of 10, this, that, and the other. Also, just as an aside, when I'm talking about fluency, I'm talking cross-age. I'm talking generally. I'm talking, we could be early years, primary, Key Stage 2, all the way up to Key Stage 3 and beyond. I'm just talking very generally about it. So whichever area of the field you've come from, it'll all be relevant. Joanne in the comments, will we be able to access the recording afterwards? Absolutely. This Crowdcast webinar still exists on the same link, and the best way to find it and any other webinars that you're interested in that I've done, you can go to my website, www.abigailsteeletraining.com, and in the menu at the top there is a button that says webinars, and the webinars are all there. So I've put this Crowdcast platform as a page in my website, so anytime you can just go back and you can watch it. And you can share the recording, you can, watch it with other people, not precious about anything like that. And the other thing that I will do, because, believe in passing it on and helping out where I can, a lot of you coming will be leaders in your field, in your schools. I will put a link in this chat later. So come back to the webinar later for a link in the chat, and I'll put the slides, and you can download the slides. And then if you want to use any of those, cut, paste them, share them, absolutely fine. So romping on, what is reading fluency? Have a little very brief think. What is your understanding of the term reading fluency? If you're feeling brave about that, put something in the chat, any words that come to mind or a definition that you've been kind of leaning on. What do you think that is meant by reading fluency? And there's a clue there. A quick internet search reveals different definitions. We're not all on the same page, across the landscape. Hearts for Learning, I was reading one of their blogs yesterday, and they were talking about, when you talk about fluency, you're potentially opening a huge can of worms. There are lots of definitions, lots of different interpretations. For me, reading fluency, my first thoughts about it, I'm thinking about, well, reading naturally, reading effortlessly, not having to work too hard at the reading. And then if, thinking more deeply, well, I would like learners to be able to read the words on the page, to decode them accurately and automatically with an element of kind of natural effortlessness, a bit of pace. And I would like them to have the comprehension, the understanding of what it is they're reading. And that kind of gives them this natural fluent reading. And then that will enable them to get further comprehension from that of the text. And they'll be able to improve their kind of expression and their prosody. So lots of different things. Here are some example definitions. Fluency refers to continuity, smoothness, rate, and effort. Fluency is the ability to read with proper speed, accuracy, and expression. A fluent reader is one who can accurately and automatically decode words. Fluency is the link between recognizing words and understanding them. Fluency is reading with accuracy, automaticity, and prosody. So there's lots of different overlaps there. Some people there in their definition including things like expression and prosody. Reference there to rate and speed, so the pace of the reading. Effort, I quite like that one. Some of the definitions there staying more towards fluent decoding, sort of accurate and automatic decoding of words, and not really delving into the prosody, expression, speed, keeping it sort of more simple than that. So it's just really interesting. And I haven't put where these sources have come from, but these are all reputable definitions, reputable sources. I think, different places that we would all sort of respect and look to, current and old. You notice when you start researching a topic, because you want to kind of put together a presentation, you want to think, what have other people said? It's really fascinating looking back on historical documents, the amount of people replicate what somebody else said, and you'll track back and go, well, they said that. Yeah, but they said that. Oh, but they said that. Are we all copying each other? Are we thinking about our own definitions? It's very interesting. So here are some thoughts on that. Is the word fluency always the correct choice of word? If we're taking it as a very light meaning, yes, it can absolutely fit. But if we're being quite specific, and if we are thinking more carefully about fluency in our schools, then do we need to be more careful about, was that the word that you meant? Did you mean fluency, or did you mean another aspect? Did you mean a part of fluency? Do people sometimes mean reading confidently, or reading well, or being able to read independently? And again, you could argue that, well, fluency encapsulates those, but sometimes you could argue that those might be better words rather than fluency, if fluency has connotations of other things. Do people sometimes muddle fluency with comprehension or with prosody? Should they be separate? Should they be completely included? Can you read fluently, but actually quite slowly? Can you read and can you have really good understanding of what's going on? You've got expression, but actually you're just quite a slow reader. So we have to be fast. Sometimes the use of the word fluency feels very precise, and other times it feels really woolly. And that's one of the things that I'm going to kind of quickly demonstrate today, going through some examples of the amount of times it's cropping up, and in some cases we're clear about what it means, and in some cases it's not so clear. Now, this is something I suspect adds to the muddlement of it. Does the definition of fluency change as readers develop in age and stage? I strongly suspect that's part of what's causing a bit of an issue. Is it being overused? Also quite possible. I think there's a lot of repetition of the word fluency in some documents where if we were marking those documents, we would say, perhaps try to use another word other than fluency. You've repeated this a lot, not to the best effect. And how much does it even really matter? Maybe it's overused because it matters so much. So some, again, just really interesting things to think about there. Is fluency a skill or is it an outcome? So I quite like Scarborough's reading rope. I like to kind of go back to that and refer to that of like, what are the components of reading? What are the elements of reading? And I thought, like, let's get up and see, let's see where fluency sits. Where does fluency sit on Scarborough's reading rope? Well, the mention of fluency is as an outcome. It's at the end. When you are a skilled reader, when you are skilled at reading, you have fluent execution and coordination of word recognition and text comprehension. So there's our definition of fluency. So fluency isn't something that crops up in those sort of beginning components, all those components that we're working on. It doesn't mean to say that it has to just come afterwards. Could it be both? Could fluency be something that we teach and we activate and readers use from right at the very, very beginning of starting to read? So that's one definition of reading. So that's almost like the technical side of reading. We're also teaching the fluency, and then it progresses and it develops and it develops and it develops and it becomes, also the outcome that when you can do all of these things increasingly strategically and increasingly automatically, that you become fluent as an outcome of that. I think it's both. I think it has a double meaning. How much does it matter? Apparently, a lot. So I dare you to count how many times the word fluency is being used in recent Ofsted and DFE documents, blogs, papers. I was feeling a bit devilish yesterday preparing this, and I thought, oh, maybe I'll count them for you. And I thought, no, that's silly. That doesn't matter. I've highlighted some examples for you, but it is cropping up an awful lot. I wonder if this is because, so this is my kind of like, in a nutshell, I wonder, it's because, and this is what we see mentioned in that Ofsted report, the English research review that came out March 2024, Key Stage 1 is showing stronger reading. We're doing a fantastic job of teaching reading, of, all the phonics is going really well and readers are doing really well. But there is still a gap in Key Stage 2. Something's still not quite there because the end of Key Stage 2 results aren't really reflecting what we want them to reflect. And also with strugglers who are moving through Key Stage 2 into Key Stage 3, and everyone's looking for the solution. We're actually all on the same team. We all want to know, how can we create more confident, independent, stronger, resilient readers who are able to access their Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4 curriculum because they have those reading skills embedded from earlier on. So if Key Stage 2 were stronger readers, more fluent, they would develop deeper comprehension. I wonder if this is the strand of thinking that we're getting from Ofsted and the DFE. We're really doing well in Key Stage 1, but if we could now get Key Stage 2 to be more fluent readers, they would then develop deeper comprehension skills. They would then have this deeper ability to read that they would achieve better in Key Stage 2, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, so it matters a lot in terms of expectations and what is being looked at in the field of education at the moment. So what does the research say? I went down the rabbit hole. Oh my goodness. And I barely scratched the surface. There is so much out there on fluency. There's a huge amount that comes from other countries like the USA. There's loads of references that you can sort of trawl back through. Some of the references I wasn't able to access because so for example, Ofsted might have mentioned a piece of research. I then put that into my Google, but you have to then pay subscriptions to be able to access articles and things like that. So we could do weeks looking at it and talking about it and exploring it. And because of that, the nuances, the difficulty in agreeing a definition, it also becomes very sticky, a bit of a web trying to unpick it all. And maybe that's not really necessary. Maybe it's more relevant for our purposes in practice today to look at, well, okay, that research is all behind us and we've got all those research links, but what is being said in the more current documents that are going to inform our practice? So I looked at Education Endowment Fund, I looked at Ofsted, particularly that March English research review, and I looked at, of course, the reading framework as our go-to. I thought, well, what are they saying about reading fluency? Are they agreeing with each other? What tips are they giving? So the EEF, there's a blog by Professor Timothy Rzinski of Kent State University, USA. And he's talking about the importance of teaching reading fluency. That was dated, I think, 2021, but this all goes back, honestly, years and years and years. This is nothing new at all, nothing revolutionary, nothing new. And it's really the same information, the same messages. So I really liked the first part of his blog that explained about what do we need to know about it, you know, his sort of definition of it. I didn't love it so much later on, and I'll get to that bit later. What do we need to know about reading fluency? Scientific research has consistently recognized the critical nature of fluency as a bridge between effortful decoding and comprehension. A fluent reader is one who can accurately and automatically decode words. And interestingly, some of his exact definition, the exact wording, I've seen replicated in other documents and blogs by Ofsted. If readers can decode words accurately, but they have to work hard at it, they have to employ an excessive proportion of their cognitive resources to do so, it's hard work. They have fewer of those resources available for comprehension. However, when readers are accurate and automatic, they can decode with minimal use of their cognitive resources. It's become very natural for them, thus allowing them to channel their effort towards comprehending and making sense of what they have read. Makes sense, quite a nice little explanation there. So then I'm thinking, okay, so if you are strong at decoding, you've had loads of practice at decoding, you're doing really well, you can decode words, you become a strong decoder, and you've then got some fluency, you're able to decode with some fluency, it will enable you to get the comprehension, yes? Or is it that you can decode, you're decoding, and as you're decoding going along, you're accessing the comprehension as you decode, as you read, and that will lead you to be a fluent reader because you are decoding and you're understanding it, and therefore when you read it, you are automatically more fluent. So that's really interesting. I've worked with many beginner readers who did not have what I would call fluent decoding, but they did have perfect comprehension. So even though they were having to work hard at some of that decoding, they were completely understanding everything. I could ask them any questions about any of the word level comprehension, the sentence level, the text level. They had fantastic comprehension of it. So that makes me think that we need to kind of remind ourselves that it's not a broad brush. It's not the same for all children. You'll teach the same group of children with the same profiles, and you're teaching them the same lessons, but the way people develop as readers can be quite different from one another, and we have to kind of tune into those individuals and look at what's going on. So I wonder that both of these ideas are completely valid and correct. Strong decoding, get really good at decoding those words, and then build your fluency at that decoding. You are accurate and you are automatic as you are decoding. Frees up your mind, you can access the comprehension. Also, it works the other way as well. When you are decoding and you are comprehending at the same time, fluency can be the outcome. So not straightforward. Okay, EEF continued. Another component of fluency, and I wanted to kind of throw this in and mention it because prosody does kind of go hand in hand. It is a bit part and parcel. Another component of fluency that links word recognition to comprehension is prosody, or expressive oral and silent reading. Think of anyone you would consider a fluent reader. Not only do they decode words automatically, but they also read the words in text with expression and phrasing that reflects and amplifies the meaning of the text. To read with appropriate expression and phrasing requires the reader to access the meaning of the text. So again, all kind of bundled up and a bit part and parcel. And they've got quite a nice, in the EEF, they've got quite a nice little diagram that kind of shows this. How accuracy, reading words correctly, automaticity, reading words automatically, and prosody, reading with appropriate stress and intonation, lead to fluency. But I think the point that I'm trying to get to is it's not as straightforward as that. And I'm going to get in a muddle explaining it. It's not as straightforward. You can have, for example, I would say a reader could be fluent, but not necessarily have all the prosody yet. they're a fluent decoder and a comprehender at the level that they're at. I think it changes and it evolves and it's different at different ages and stages. And I just think that's worth bearing in mind. So park that for 1 minute, the EEF stuff. Now, the EEF stuff had some good bits, but I also did not hold weight on a lot of the other EEF stuff. I looked at it and thought, somebody's regurgitated some stuff that somebody once wrote in 1974. I don't think this is quite right. And I think that we're all building on this stuff without looking at the foundations of what we're building on and really exploring that with a bit more depth or applying it to what we're seeing in practice. So park that, we'll come back to it. Moving to Ofsted. Now, in 2019, when we were at the start of all of this focus on early reading in the Ofsted deep dives, Jill Jones put out this blog and she said, we've made the early reading deep dive mandatory because it's so important that children learn to read fluently as quickly as possible. Inevitably, fluent readers will learn more because they can read and gain knowledge for themselves. And in that context, I take that to mean strong. We need strong readers. We need resilient readers. We need skilled readers at that early stage to enable them to build their reading skills as they progress. But this was kind of the start of, oh, look, fluent. Interestingly, there's another blog that I refer to quite a lot recently, and I can't think off the top of my head what it's called. In the webinar that I did for what's going on in Key Stage 3 at the moment with Ofsted, I refer to it in there, and I think it was written by Lee Alston, is that how you say his name? And he wrote this whole blog, and he talks about all the same stuff, and he does not mention the word fluently or fluent. He talks about reading well. And I thought, oh, how it's just really interesting that he doesn't use this word. He uses reading well. Made it, different read interesting. So the latest thing, telling the story, the English Education Subject Report. So this is the research report on English that Ofsted have very recently released. Little bit controversial. Some of the English organisations have done a bit of a feedback of, I don't always agree with all of this. There's other things to think about. They did a nice recognition, I think, of the NATE organisation, National Association of Teaching English. They did a nice piece explaining about external factors. There's a lot that comes into play here that's not in our control in the classroom. That was a good bit of a read there. So let's look at what this English report from Ofsted is saying. And really what I want to highlight to you is the amount of times fluency is referenced. So they're saying teaching of reading has improved markedly. And I'm just jumping down to the focus bullet point here. Once pupils are able to read accurately, schools are less clear about how to build fluency and comprehension. That feels a little bit ambiguous to me. Do they mean build fluency? If pupils are reading accurately, what is missing for them to have the fluency? Is it the automaticity? Are they missing the comprehension? Are they missing the prosody? So what does that look like? Do they mean instead build wider reading skills, including comprehension, including prosody, including maybe pace beyond year 2? So do we need to look at the age of this as well? Because if I'm teaching in a school and I read this report, I want to know, okay, what do you mean? How can I build up that fluency? What does that look like in practice, please, for me in the classroom? Here, a little extract from curriculum pedagogy in primary. Leaders understand the impact of being able to read fluently and choosing to read on pupils' future academic success and lifelong well-being. So again, just a reference to fluency, impact of being able to read fluently. That's the important bit. Another bit, some schools are effective in continuing to develop pupils' reading fluency once they can decode. And again, it's like that makes it sound a bit like you have to learn to decode first and then you can work on the fluency. Don't you work on the fluency at the same time as decoding, and you work on the comprehension at the same time as decoding? My colleague Ruth Baker-Leask always talks about English is an ecosystem. It's not linear. It all overlaps, and you have to do things concurrently and depending on ages and stages. They provide pupils with lots of opportunities to read aloud and be read to, so they learn how to control the pace and intonation in their reading. In other schools, leaders recognise the importance of reading fluently, but are not clear about how to make sure that pupils are successful. So, picking into this paragraph a bit, some schools are effective and continue to develop pupils' reading fluency once they can code. So this following sentence would sound like the kind of, and this is what you need to do. They provide pupils with lots of opportunities to read aloud and be read to, so they learn how to control the pace and intonation in their reading. So that's a little hint as to, oh, okay, so opportunities to read aloud, opportunities to be read to help them learn about controlling pace and intonation in their reading. I don't disagree, but I think there's a little bit more to it, and we'll get to that. A comment for primary and secondary, again, another example of the word fluently. Leaders arrange additional teaching for pupils in key stages 2 and 3 who are not yet reading fluently. Too often, however, this teaching does not directly address their knowledge gaps and is not frequent enough for them to catch up quickly. I could do a whole webinar on that, but I'm just demonstrating the repetition of fluently. At secondary, schools are often unsure how to help pupils who arrive at secondary school unable to read and write fluently. Teachers do not always identify and teach the specific aspects of reading and writing that pupils are finding difficult. Sometimes the activities given to pupils mask rather than address skills they need to improve and practice. So we're getting the hint here, we need to drill down and we need to look carefully at, is it the fluency they need to improve? And if we think it is, how are we going to do that? For example, providing tasks that reduce the need to write does not help pupils improve their handwriting. These pupils are often not making the rapid progress needed. Discussion of findings. In some primary schools, teachers are not clear about the purpose of the task that address different elements of English. So that's another reference there, isn't it, about appropriacy of task. Does the task match what it is that you are trying to get children to practice or improve? For example, in guided reading sessions, the same text is used for teaching language comprehension and word reading fluency. And this is a bit naughty, really, because you could have the same text. Of course, you could have the same text to use for language comprehension and word reading fluency. These texts serve neither purpose well for pupils in the early stages of learning to read. With limited decoding skills, they cannot yet read at the level of their oral understanding. Again, that could be a whole another webinar. I agree with the sentiment. Sometimes we need to be more careful about the validity, the purpose of the text. Is this text better for word reading fluency, or is this text better for teaching language comprehension? So absolutely, of course, we need to drill down and think about that. But I think that this is misleading, because I think that there are plenty of texts that do both those things at the same time completely adequately. Reading. Some schools have developed clear strategies to help pupils achieve reading fluency, recognising it's important for their reading comprehension. However, pupils do not always have sufficient practice to achieve this. I don't know why I didn't highlight that bit in green, because this is a top tip for me. Sufficient practice. This is where I'm going to go to by the end of this session. That actually the answer is practice, more opportunity. So sufficient practice, bear that in mind. In these schools, teachers overuse reading comprehension questions. This does not build pupils' reading fluency. If you want children or readers to get better at reading fluently, you need to give them opportunities to do reading. It's as simple as that. Which is interesting, because I feel like that's what they're trying to say, but then they get it a little bit wrong later on, generally in education. Recommendations for primary and secondary. Plan a reading curriculum that over time builds pupils' reading fluency, linguistic knowledge and knowledge of the world, and that does not limit them to responding to exam-style questions. Interestingly, I saw a thread on X, Twitter, this morning, and it was talking about that somebody had been criticised in their school that all of the children's reading was too much linked to other curriculum subjects, and there was fierce debate about it. And then I'm pretty sure in this report, actually, they allude to that it's good practice to do both. Some of your texts and the things that you use, by all means, have cross-curriculum links. That's how you're going to help get in all of your, subject knowledge for other subjects. But sometimes just have texts because they're a great text, because they benefit the skills that you want to teach in English or in reading. Anyway, I digress. Encourage pupils to read a wide range of books once they are fluent readers, and so build a reading habit. I would also say encourage pupils to read a wide range of books and be read a wide range of books before they are fluent readers, because I would argue that perhaps you can be a fluent reader at the stage of reading that you're at all the way along the journey. Help those pupils who enter Key Stages 2 or 3 unable to read fluently to catch up quickly. This includes making sure that teaching addresses specific gaps in pupils' phonic knowledge or provides additional practice for pupils who have accurate knowledge but still read too slowly to absorb information effectively. Just going to throw it out there. I've worked with learners before at all sorts of ages, especially sort of older learners who, despite all the practice in the world, the effort in the world, they are just a naturally slower reader. Doesn't mean we're not going to try. Of course, we're still going to try because we want them to be able to absorb more information, of course. But it's not always you if you're not managing to achieve that with every single learner. They're all just very different in the way that they access. Another recommendation here for primary, make sure that staff know how to continue to develop pupils' reading fluency once they're able to decode accurately, which for the majority will happen at the end of a phonics program. Here I wonder that the word fluency is not quite the best word. I should have put a comment. I can't think off the top of my head what word I would use there instead. But again, I would say this isn't something that follows on. You don't teach them to decode accurately with their phonics. They get to the end of the phonics program, and now we start to work on reading fluently. We teach to read fluently from the beginning at the level that we're at. It should be a very smooth transition. When we finish the phonics program, we should be teaching, it's like strength of reading, strength and resilience and stamina and the ability to read increasingly complex texts that develop alongside our knowledge and our comprehension. And yeah, just it feels too disjointed here. Secondary, make sure the staff who support the weakest readers know how to identify whether they need help with decoding or reading fluency and act on it. Again, this is making it sound like two very different things. I tend to find if an older student, if a student at Key Stage 3, out of context, they know all of the phonic sounds. You do a phonics test, they know all the phonic sounds, but they're just not reading fluently, then actually they need more practice at the decoding. They need more decoding practice at a lower level to build up their stamina and their fluency at the decoding. It's not two different things. So again, a bit of a danger area there. I do agree that we have to try to diagnose and pinpoint so that we don't waste pupils' time doing activities that are not needed, not necessary. So I'm not trying to be overcritical, I'm just trying to get us to think. Right, summary of the research review relevant to reading primary. Reading comprehension requires knowledge of vocabulary, context, including the background knowledge of the subject of the text, syntax and narrative structure, as well as the capacity to read fluently. Again, I go back to, it works both ways. Reading fluently is a part and parcel of what will lead to the comprehension, but also having all of those things and having the comprehension will lead to the fluency. Therefore, a broad curriculum taught to pupils of all ages will help them to understand texts. Reading comprehension strategies can help pupils to uncover the meaning of texts. However, the usefulness of explicit teaching of these strategies is time limited and unlikely to benefit pupils before they can read sufficiently fluently. Teachers help pupils to build fluency in reading while they are learning to decode. So now they're saying it, while they're learning to decode, by making sure that they read and reread decodable books. I think this is perhaps an example of sometimes when people make, and I'm doing it here, I've pulled out extracts to demonstrate my point and to give you a flavour of the things being said. When you pull out extracts and you only look at summaries of things and you don't look at the whole document yourself, you might miss that actually, oh, here they are saying building fluency while they're learning to decode. It's not a before and after situation. So this is how you can see that in education, messages become a bit twisted by the time they reach you, because different people put different spins on things. And you should always go back to the source document when you have a minute, read the whole thing, and then reread it, and then read a summary and come on a training session and do all of it. Anyway, reading and rereading decodables. This builds up the bank of words pupils can read at a glance. Beyond phonics and into Key Stage 2, some leaders recognise the importance of reading aloud and repeated reading to build fluency. However, pupils do not always have sufficient practice to achieve this. In many schools, pupils who cannot read fluently have to complete written reading comprehension tasks from extracts, usually as part of guided reading sessions. This is at the expense of other kinds of work, such as reading the text repeatedly, being monitored by an adult when reading aloud, rehearsing reading with prosody, patterns of stress and intonation, or reading more whole texts to build fluency. So it's interesting, a lot of schools I work with have moved away from, for example, those sessions where in guided reading children are completing written reading comprehension tasks. There has been a bit of a shift away from that, but it's interesting to see that in their research, they're saying that they're still seeing a lot of that. Not that you have to not do that at all, but that they're seeing it to the detriment of time spent on actually just practicing reading. A bit for secondary, summary of the research for secondary. Proficiency in reading is absolutely essential in order for pupils to successfully access the English and the broader curriculum. This is why it's necessary that pupils learn to decode accurately and with automaticity at the start of primary school. This will also help pupils to develop positive attitudes to reading, which will develop their proficiency further and lead to more encounters with text and an increase in comprehension, all spirals into one another. Reading comprehension requires knowledge of vocabulary, context, syntax, and narrative structure, as well as the capacity to read fluently. So that was our Ofsted bit. Let me take a sip of drink. You're welcome to say anything in the comments. You can, you know, agree, disagree, etc. Or you can just listen to me waff on and think in your heads. Right, reading framework. So let's have a little look at what the reading framework says. And the reading framework has an entire section dedicated to developing fluency. Section 4 starts on page 60. And they break it into fluency, speed and accuracy, and progressive fluency. Interesting. So this, I've highlighted green because I went, oh yes, oh now, we're distinguishing between types of fluency. Here is an acknowledgement about that fluency that is not the end result. It's the fluency that's coming earlier. It's the fluent decoding. Fluent decoding allows us to understand what we read. Because the reader has gained accuracy and automaticity in word reading, the brain's resources are able to focus on lifting the meaning from the page, connecting the words and sentences, and making connections across the text. As pupils gain fluency, their motivation increases, they start to enjoy reading more and are willing to do more of it. Usually, not with everyone. We all know we've got some that we've got to absolutely, you know, try and find all the tricks to help them, encourage them to, you know, enjoy reading. So fluent decoding, I like it, more specific, fluent decoding. Fluency, speed, accuracy. Researchers generally define and measure fluency in terms of the number of words within a passage read correctly per minute. As well as speed, accuracy also influences fluency. The national curriculum refers to pupils reading words comprising the Year 1 GPCs accurately and speedily, reflecting this concept of fluency. I feel really wary of too much emphasis on that information about this. How many words can they read correctly per minute? Again, if you look on Facebook pages and Facebook groups of people sharing their data about these assessments that they've been doing, the amount of time it must have taken to do these fluency assessments with the whole class and then type up all of the data. And when you look through all that data, they're all roughly about the same. Okay, 95.4, 94.8, 96.9, 98.2. Yeah, great. They can all read fluently. And then you might have a couple who are reading much more slowly. But did you need to do all of that work to tell you that Maisie is really struggling to read with fluency and she reads at a rate of, I don't know, 50% fluency or 50 words per minute or whatever? Did you need to do that to get that information? I think it's a red herring. Anyway, fluency gives, I do like this bit. This is the bit about speed and pace that I like, because I'm not criticizing that, I'm criticizing that we end up getting led down the wrong hole of the things. Fluency gives the reader the choice to read at a speed that allows for comprehension and can be adapted to the purpose of the reading. I am a completely fluent reader at many of the things that I read. Some documents that I might choose to read, I would not be deemed fluent in reading those things because I really would struggle with the technical vocabulary, or perhaps it's been written really badly and I have to read it multiple times just to try and get some sense of it. So I'm not going to be fluent in reading those things, but I am a fluent reader, a strong fluent reader. So having that ability to read fluently gives me, I've got choices. I can read fast if I want. I can read slowly if I want. I can put emphasis on if I want. I know that I have to read more slowly and more carefully if it's a challenging document or if it's important to me that I, pick up every single word from it. So I like that bit. Beginner readers, however, whatever their age, don't have a choice about speed because they're still engaged in decoding the words on the page. Fair enough, yeah. And just in case, obviously go back to your reading framework section 4, have a flick through it, pull out the information. But if you wanted to go down the rabbit hole of looking at that historical research, where's this coming from? Who's saying what? These are the references that they've drawn upon there. Okay. Pupils do not pass through a magic barrier and suddenly become fluent. There is no point in pupils reading speedily if the words they read are wrong. For example, if they read place for palace, and we know that's a really frustrating issue that sometimes happens in about year 3, year 4, when children become more fluent, they develop their wider, more mature reading skills, they rely less on their sort of decoding skills, and they can end up making lots of mistakes because the kind of fluency gets ahead of them and they're not quite there for it yet. They need to be brought back to read it carefully, read it accurately. Equally, accuracy on its own is not useful unless they can read at a sufficient rate to support comprehension. So there is such a thing as too slow a pace. It's going to hamper, it's going to be a barrier to your comprehension. Both accuracy and speed are essential. Researchers have also suggested prosody as an indicator of fluency. However, a reader is unlikely to show a good grasp of prosody if they cannot already read the words with appropriate pace. So I've put a couple of comments here. Perhaps pace would have been a better vocabulary choice than speed. Perhaps I'm being picky and pedantic, but speed makes me feel like, oh, I've got to be really quick. I've got to do something fast. Pace feels varied to me. We can choose our pace. So researchers aren't necessarily always right, and prosody can be viewed as an outcome, as fluency can also be viewed as an outcome. I like this. I like that in the reading framework, they then talk about progressive fluency. So it's kind of, again, an acknowledgement of the different ways that it works. Many factors contribute to fluency. Marianne Wolf reached the unsettling conclusion that reading fluency involves every process and subskill involved in reading. It's influenced by the development of rapid rates of processing in all the components of reading. So it might be helpful to consider the idea of progressive rather than absolute fluency. I like this. This is a good idea. The teacher helps pupils to gain reading fluency at each stage in the same way that a piano teacher helps a pupil to gain musical fluency at each grade. Now, I also really like when people do an analogy of learning to read or teaching to read or learning to read is really similar to learning to play a musical instrument. Little and often, practice, 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 practice. You learn to play a musical instrument by lots and lots of opportunities to practice playing that instrument over and over and over again. And that's how you build up that ability to play an instrument. So I do really like that. And I was loving this idea about, this progressive fluency, not absolute fluency. I like that we're unpicking this definition, that we gain fluency at each stage and it's, gradual. However, it then went a bit swift and I wasn't so keen on this bit. So Reading framework, the piano teacher supports the child to practice playing a piece of music fluently at that grade. Once the child can play the piece automatically, the teacher draws attention to the expression marks and the phrasing. Together, they decide how the piece will be performed. At each grade, the complexity of the music increases, but the actual process of becoming fluent remains the same. So take it on surface value, like, yes, that makes sense, that's good. However, I think that this is laying a foundation of a little bit going down the wrong track with all of this rereading. But this was so close to being a great analogy. Imagine the restriction and the boredom of only one piece of music at each level. So we're talking about, you take this piece of music and you get really fluent at it, you get really good at this piece of music. Well, why would you just get really good at that one piece of music? Why wouldn't you learn and practice the notes and the techniques and a range of pieces of music at each level? By all means, including one or two pieces that you develop further or you master, you really go to town on, the performance and all those other bits. If desired, absolutely fine, but don't restrict it to just that one bit. So fluency at the level, fluency of the skills and the knowledge rather than fluency at the piece of music. Because I think this underpins the idea of reread the book, reread the book, reread the book, reread the book. Now you can repeat the book, you've memorized the book. Oh, they're fluent. They're not fluent. They're just memorizing the blinking book for you. Anyway, so developing fluency while teaching pupils to decode, I like this. This is still reading framework. Practicing to gain automaticity in decoding needs to begin by focusing on accuracy. Accuracy, I think, is really important. I think that's something we need to take up into Key Stage 2 is reminding pupils to read accuracy, not accepting them to substitute words or to skip over words. By all means, if you're doing something on skimming, scanning, or getting the gist, fine. But generally, more emphasis on being accurate is important. It prevents the bad skills forming. This is also true for older pupils who need support. This means pupils must first work out a word by sounding and blending. Most of them have to do this several times before they can read it accurately at a glance. Rereading a text, therefore, gradually increases the number of words in it that they can read at a glance. Urging pupils to read at speed will not increase their fluency. They can only read at the speed that they can decode. So a little acknowledgement there just at the end of what I was saying about maybe pace is a better word than speed, because yes, we don't want to force them to read fast. That's not what it's about. But I've put sort of I've highlighted orange as like a not so sure. I've put reading multiple texts containing the same and similar words in and out of context gradually increases the number of words in it that they can read at a glance. So actually, let's think of a really straightforward example. The ant. The ant is on the pan. The ant is in the can. And you read it again. The ant is on the pan. The ant is on the can. And each time they read it, they don't have to sort of decode and sound out all the words. And so, yeah, you would reread a couple of times. But actually, wouldn't you then want to read something about, I don't know, the ant in the pit is an ant, or just different contexts and different books and different storylines to keep the interest, because I do see children being really bored and being really turned off reading by having to reread the same book over and over again. If you want to reread, fantastic. If there's a benefit of rereading, fantastic. But if it's just rereading to build the fluency, I question it. And I've put rereading a text has other benefits. Enjoyment, absolutely. Deeper understanding, absolutely. You can focus on other things. Prosody, syntax, absolutely. There are many values to it. I just think it's overused and it worries me. So recognizing familiar words at a glance. Some pupils can decode a word by sounding and blending once. Later, whenever they come across the same word, they can read it at a glance. As a nice acknowledgement, yeah, because some pupils don't struggle with this. That's it. They can just very quickly pick this up. Most pupils, or many pupils, however, have to decode a word overtly several times in different contexts before it becomes familiar enough to read at a glance. So they are saying the right thing. They do know this. It's just words are not brilliantly sometimes. Pupils learn to read words at a glance more easily if, When they first decode a word by saying the sounds and blending them, they know what it means. The written word is a label for what the spoken word represents. A pupil, therefore, might be more likely to read dog at a glance than cog and splash rather than stash. The more words pupils can read at a glance, the sooner they see beyond the word as consisting of a series of letters to decode and can focus on what the word means. And for many pupils, that's really, really natural and automatic. So then the reading framework acknowledges this. One teacher with one pupil. It's difficult for teachers to find the time to listen to pupils reading individually. However, if they did, the teacher would choose a book matched closely to the GPC's, grapheme phoneme correspondences, if you're not familiar, the pupil knew, and the number of words the pupil would be likely to be able to read at a glance. The teacher would start by showing interest in the book, connecting it to something the pupil knew about or had read before. So in the reading framework, they acknowledge like it's really hard to do one-to-one reading. And I agree, it's really hard to be able to carve out the time to do one-to-one reading. But I think we have to try as best we can. If we can recruit volunteer readers in to help, if we can, if we're lucky enough to have a teaching support assistant or a second pair of hands, if we can find ways of juggling, it's far more beneficial to hear children read one-to-one than to do all those measuring the fluency assessments. I just think let's not give up on one-on-one reading because the benefits are huge. So my top tip is try to do one-to-one reading when you can. Try to find clever ways. Carrying on of what what you would see. The teacher would expect the pupils to sound out unfamiliar words and would praise them for doing so. The teacher might reread a sentence or a page to the pupil to help them keep track of what was going on and explain the meaning of a word in the context of the story. Sometimes they might reread sections together. At the end of the reading, the teacher might say, "You could read this to your dad tonight. He'll be so impressed." Above all, the teacher would make the process interactive and meaningful. The next day, they might start a new book together or reread the same book so the pupil could read more words at a glance and notice more of what they were reading. What lovely guidance coming out of the reading framework, describing natural, traditional, what we know is good stuff, how you would sit and read a book with a child. You might reread sections. The teacher might reread a sentence or a page to help them keep track. The teacher might explain the meaning of the word in context. The teacher might say at the end, "You could read it to your dad." I mean, yes, this is beautiful stuff. And I love this. The next day, they might start a new book together. The teacher makes the judgment. Shall we reread this? Should we do that? Are there benefits? Does the child need it? Or will we now read a new book at the same level for that, fine progression? So the correct guidance is there and it's lovely to see. Reading framework then goes on to talk about, if you can't do one-on-one reading, you have to replicate as best you can that scenario with your whole class. And I think that's really good to bear in mind. When we do group guided reading or when we do whole class reading, as best we can, we are trying to replicate the experience from a one-to-one reading session. So you have to think about how to organise your pupils if you're going to put them in groups so they can practice reading a decodable book or text. Might be within the main class or group phonics lessons, or it could be in groups throughout the day. However you logistically organise that is on you. And then you might choose the book or text that matches closely the grapheme phoneme correspondences that the group knows and takes into account the pupil's skill in blending the sounds in words that are familiar. You're going to pick a book that is well matched for that group of children. You might note which words need explaining. You might clarify the purpose of any rereading. So why are we doing a rereading if we're doing one? Is it necessary? Is it to increase the number of words they can read at a glance? Is it that decoding fluency? Is it because we want to discuss the plot of the story, the characters, their motives, and what is the purpose? And then decide which book they'll take home to read. Do they want to take home the same book and read it to their parents and kind of demonstrate what they've been doing? Do they need to take home a book which is at a similar level, but it's a different book? So as their knowledge of the GPCs increases and the words they can read at a glance increases, the pupils can gradually read longer books. And I wouldn't say longer books. So yes, we are building up stamina, but also more complex books, across all the sort of levels. So we've hit 11 o'clock, so we've hit an hour, but I'm just going to keep going. I haven't got that much more to do, and I'm getting to my final summary point. So thank you for bearing with me if you're still listening, and I'll romp on. Oh, thank you. And if you have to go because you've only got an hour, then I apologise. Catch up on the last 10 minutes later on, come back and watch it later. So this is just continuing that bit of reading framework. They will also learn to draw knowledge of other words, for example, common spelling patterns such as the morphemes. Eventually, they'll no longer need the support of books deliberately structured to be decodable for beginners, and they'll be able to read any age-appropriate literature. And I think that's where some schools are further forward, because some schools have taken a bit longer to get sorted with, for example, their early years and Key Stage 1 book provision, their phonics. There's been a huge amount of work, a huge amount of change and updating. People have been working really hard. The next thing to look at is the kind of, okay, so once they are up and running, what does our age-appropriate literature look like? You know, are we expecting too big a jump to go from essentially decodables to really quite a good level, but then we're suddenly letting them loose on stuff that might be a too big a jump? Whether that means you use a reading scheme, or whether that means that you just really review carefully the books that you have on offer, I think that's still a little bit of work that some schools are doing. Some schools are, you know, there with it, but I think that's a whole area that we could look at. Anyway, continuing to develop fluency once pupils decode. Now, remember I said about, don't really like these as two separate things, learn to decode, then develop the fluency. But I think because the reading framework has acknowledged that you do teach fluency from the beginning, you are working on fluency at those early levels. Really what they mean here is continuing to develop fluency. They mean continuing to develop wider reading skills, stamina, resilience, strong reading, you know, all of it, prosody, comprehension, the lot. I think they're using it as a broad definition. Once pupils can decode most unfamiliar words speedily, and I've put there confident independently, don't necessarily want speeding, want accurate decoding, and read many familiar words at a glance in text written to match the GPCs they know, they've taken their first steps towards fluency. However, for many pupils, becoming a fluent reader takes a considerable and continuing investment of time. There are no shortcuts. I've put for many pupils, really, surely most pupils with quality phonics teaching and plenty of reading opportunities will follow the progression of accurate and automatic decoding plus age-appropriate comprehension equals age-appropriate fluency. So are we now talking about a fluent reader as a fully mature fluent reader, e.g. end of Key Stage 2 expectation? So again, that definition just changing a little bit there. And actually, this is a reflection of what the Ofsted report was saying. Reading's really, really strong in Key Stage 1, but we're just not quite hitting the mark by the end of Key Stage 2. So you know, what are we going to do to kind of get them there? Fluency develops progressively as pupils are introduced to and reread books that include new vocabulary, language structures that they might not otherwise have read for themselves, as well as challenging ideas. Their familiarity with a text is critical to building fluency. Is it? Depending on your definition of fluency, you do not need familiarity with a text to be able to read it fluently. So I question that. I don't agree. I don't think that you have to have familiarity with a text to be able to be fluent at reading that text. You need the word reading skills. You need the comprehension knowledge. At the point of decoding it, the words need to be at a level where they match your decoding ability and also your comprehension, so that you know what the words mean as you read it, and that you're reading accurately and automatically enough with good enough pace that you are able to pick up the meaning of what you're reading. But I don't think that's about familiarity with the text. So again, a little bit misleading there. So that's a pause for thought and kind of summing up a little bit about what I feel like I've been banging on about in this session. Won't familiarity with the same text or multiple rereads lead to false fluency? And I want you to be aware of this idea that you might develop readers who are fluent only in the text that they've been repeatedly trained to read fluently. That doesn't mean they're a fluent reader or they're reading fluently. It means they can read fluently of the text that you have trained them to read because you put a lot of effort and a lot of work into teaching them that. It doesn't mean that's a terrible thing, because they're still learning those skills which you hope will transfer across when they read other unfamiliar text. So it's still absolutely worthwhile modeling fluency, teaching fluency, practicing on, working on the same text, being familiar. That's still really good stuff, and there's loads of good other stuff you get from that. But I just want you to hold in your mind that you could see false fluency. And again, when I reflect back on what I've seen in some Facebook groups with people doing all of these fluency assessments, I have seen comments of people say, oh, when I did this fluency assessment, or they flagged up as this score, but when they were reading this book, it didn't match what I saw. Things aren't adding up. Anyway, going back to that EEF blog that was by Timothy Rosinsky, and this is mirrored in the EEF recommendations. It's in the Improving Literacy for Key Stage 2 report with recommendations. How can we teach reading fluency well? So Timothy Rosinsky, and based on this, the EEF guidance for you in school says you can read aloud to the children, so be read aloud to. This allows them to hear fluent reading. Engage in assisted reading, so pupils read a text whilst listening to a fluent reading of the same text. And be given opportunities for repeated reading. Pupils practice reading text repeatedly until they can read the text in a fluent manner. Now, I'm not saying those are bad things to do. There are many benefits to doing those things, and fantastic for showing readers what fluency looks like, what we're aiming for, and helping them to develop that. But none of those activities, none of those things involve pupils reading for themselves. Pupils decoding the words automatically and accurately, and bringing in their comprehension and actually reading to develop their fluency. So I don't think those activities are good enough for guidance for schools. How can we teach reading fluency well? So this is my opinion on the matter and what I would suggest. We need to be, as we are, teaching decoding. So we're teaching our phonics, we're giving children loads of opportunities to read, using their phonics, decoding at, word level, sentence level, text level, focusing on accuracy and building up their automaticity by lots and lots of practice. Opportunities for them to read many different texts at different levels. Yes, words, yes, sentences, yes, paragraphs, books at the appropriate reading level. So yes, for example, matching their known GPCs, what they can cope with, matching their common exception words that they know. Or if there are things in there that they don't know, then being on hand to give them that support. And it's as simple as practice, practice, practice. Practice, 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 practice. And it goes without saying that, yes, this has got to be set within a rich reading curriculum. So I'm not poo-pooing or, this is, of course, with lots of reading to pupils, lots of exposure to a wide range of text, lots of age-appropriate comprehension and vocabulary. So all the great advice and guidance you hear out there, absolutely, I agree with doing all of that. But it goes back to that simple principle of, if you want somebody to get better at playing the piano, they must practice playing the piano. If you want somebody to get better at reading, they must practice reading, albeit with your support and guidance along the way, but they have to do the practice themselves. So don't be distracted by focusing on speed. Don't be misled and end up teaching false fluency. Focus on building stronger, more confident and resilient readers who have the strategies to be able to read unfamiliar texts with some confidence. Don't always pre-teach trickier words. Enable pupils to discover them and tackle them at the point of reading. Again, if we always do the work for them, we're masking what it is for a child to pick up a book and read it for themselves, because they've always been pre-taught anything that might be a bit tricky. So by all means, sometimes do it, but also don't always do it. Enable them to discover it. And one of the sort of wider reading skills a mature reader has is that you can use the text, use the parts you can read, and as a reader, you come to a word that you don't know, And often the text supports you in getting that word anyway. You're able to kind of work out the word fluently as you go along. It's not a big problem, but we kind of take that away from children. Absolutely praise accuracy and remind them of accuracy and effort, always praising effort. Engage in natural book interaction, so discussing the content of what you're reading. Yes, by all means, taking turns, rereading if appropriate or desired, those things that are in the reading framework. If you're doing staff training, give an awareness of what fluency is. Don't go down a rabbit hole like I did and like we have done. You don't need to make it that complicated. You can keep it simpler, of course. I just know that a lot of you that come to listen to my sessions you're working in leadership roles. This is our kind of like, this is our CPD, getting our heads into this stuff and really reflecting on it. But if you're doing staff training, give an awareness of what fluency is, that it can have different meanings, perhaps in different contexts, why it matters, that it's very important, but then focus on upskilling and empowering your staff to recognise fluency without formal assessment. So by all means, if you want to use formal assessment, do, but I just really want to encourage you that the time would be better spent doing things like allowing your colleagues to come and watch you while you read with children, and having conversations about, make little videos of children reading and then talk about what you're seeing when the children are reading. Because actually, I find that teachers and teaching assistants, they all know it, they just lose their confidence in it, and they lose their confidence in it because they think that we have to be doing all of this very formal, complicated assessment stuff. How should we be measuring and fluency then, measuring and assessing them? I go back to teacher judgment. I think that, I'm really trying to be the voice of teacher judgment is so valid. You could do informal in-house moderation. Would you mind listening to so-and-so read and tell me what you think? That's really useful. It is deemed good practice by Ofsted in a lot of the Ofsted documents at Key Stage 3 to assess pupils. So you screen them coming into secondary school, and then you do further diagnostic assessments, and they encourage you to pick out, is it decoding or is it fluency? Like, what is it that's the issue? And I've mentioned this earlier, and of course, we don't want teachers and children to be wasting any precious time doing an activity that isn't benefiting them. We do need to think about being accurate. But if you're saying, is it decoding or is it fluency? That's like saying, do they need more practice at reading or do they need more practice at reading? Is it phonics knowledge or is it fluency decoding? Well, actually, the grapheme phoneme correspondences, the phonics knowledge and decoding and fluency are not taught separately. So an intervention would involve both at the correct level. You would go back to, for example, looking at spelling alternatives of the A sound and reading words with the A sound in at a level that is appropriate for that. You wouldn't do those completely out of context. And if you're doing them out of context, well, then of course you're ending up with gaps and things not fitting in. So just be wary of this boxing things off when we know that things are much more complicated and interlinked than that. Oh, final thought, guys, final thought. Learning to read in the English language is very difficult. It is incredible that so many of us pick up the ability to read, learn to read. Maybe it's because we're actually blooming good teachers. We have a great education system. Maybe it's because human beings and the human brain is incredible. But learning to read is mind-blowing when you think about it. It's so difficult, and yet we do it and our children do it. Becoming a skilled and fluent reader is an even bigger mountain to climb. So it's one thing just to get up and running with your phonics when you're an early reader, but becoming skilled and a fluent reader by the definition of, mature fluent reader, that's huge. And maybe we're expecting too much for our pupils to be fluent readers by the end of Key Stage 1. Perhaps we should reframe our thinking. This is also one of the things that the NATE organisation put in their response back to the Ofsted research paper, is they were saying, well, actually, the pressure that we're under in schools to reach the benchmarks, we're under such pressure to reach this Key Stage 2 benchmark, and then the things that go on in secondary school as well, we're having to do certain things to get to that. And so it's all a bit back to front. Perhaps it all needs to be a bit relooked at. So maybe we reframe our thinking. Maybe instead of thinking in Key Stage 1, it's early reading and phonics, then in lower Key Stage 2, so year 3, 4, so age 8 years old, 7, 8 years old, you're a fluent reader. Fluency, we're fluent readers, we're in year 3 now. Perhaps we adapt that to, okay, early years key stage 1, we are early readers. Lower key stage 2, year 3 and 4, we are developing readers. Upper key stage 2, we're now strong readers. Aiming for key stage 3, now we are fluent readers. So perhaps we just need a little bit of a reframe and a little kind of look at how this all joins together. All good food for thought. Anyway, whew, that's not too bad. 15 minutes over, not too bad. There's a lot packed into that. So well done if you listened to the very end. I hope it was interesting. I hope it gave you food for thought. I hope it gave you both an update of kind of what's out there and what's being said, what's in some of our recent documents, but also kind of, applying it to your own practice and some confidence to kind of stick with what you know is good stuff going on. Thank you so much for the feedback. I really appreciate that, because sometimes I think, oh my gosh, I'm literally just talking, and I really don't want to come across too critical or negative about some of the reports and things that go out there, because they're very well intentioned. The right ideas are always there. I just think in our nature as human beings, we don't always communicate them in the right way, and then they become misconstrued, and when they reach us on the ground, it's just a mess. So that's what I'm trying to be the voice of. So again, thank you so much for your time. You can pop any questions in the chat if you want to. I'm trying to stop sharing so you can see my face. There we are. You can pop any questions in the chat if you want to. Yes, I will share the slides. The slides will be in this chat link. So it will take me probably about 15 minutes. I'll come out of the Crowdcast, it'll shut down. I will go and put those slides on the internet with a link, and I'll put the link in this chat. So come back to the webinar, go to the chat and click in the link. And if you have any problems at all, you can email me. My email, I'm going to type in the web thing again, hello@Abigail, oh gosh, can't even spell my name, abigailsteeletraining.com. You can email if you miss them, and I'll just send them directly. Please feel free to use them, not a problem. Oh, lovely. And reflection, yeah, it's always good to reflect, isn't it? Reflection's always good to do. So thanks again, guys. Also, another reason that I did this webinar was to raise people's awareness of this Crowdcast platform and the fact that I do webinars like this. So if there are any topics, yeah, I will get you the nursery webinar. Sarah will send you a link to that. Not a problem. But yeah, other webinars, sometimes I do them through other people like Hodder. So the nursery one was through Hodder, but I can get a link that's been put on YouTube on a private place where you can have it. But this Crowdcast platform is where I try to do my own, webinars, sort of speaking on behalf of myself. So there's topics you want to talk about, then let me know, and you can find other webinars on this page on my website. Lovely, good stuff. All right then, guys. Well, I will let you go and get on with your day. I'll go and do the PowerPoint now, and I'll see you all soon, if I can find how to turn it off. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, bye.